Having decided to add to my already busy life by undertaking the writing of a book about my divining adventures and unusual experiences in many parts of the world, I had no idea of the work that it would entail. As the book grew, more and more half-forgotten episodes struggled up from the depths of my memory and clamored for recognition, while I sat in bewilderment, unable to decide what to record and what to reject. But, as I labored in the unaccustomed problems of author-negationship, an idea took root in my mind that the book might stimulate some of my readers to take a personal interest in divining and investigate their own powers in that direction. I also thought that it might be the means of saving vast sums of money from being wasted in the search for oil and minerals. This remark will no doubt be treated with contempt and scorn by many scientists and geologists, who regard ESP, which makes divining possible, as sheer nonsense. But the labor which I have devoted to this book will be well worthwhile, if it induces some of the few, who have the power and the opportunity, to devote this wonderful gift to benefit humanity and convert the deserts and wastelands of the earth into food negation-producing areas. I am writing this in Australia, a young country which is becoming a mighty nation with such incredible speed, that to the spectator it is like watching a drama on the stage, where a whole epoch passes in one short scene. But in Australia, as in other countries, the casting off of prejudices does not keep pace with the material progress. The search for oil is in full swing in Australia at the present time. 1958, millions of pounds are being poured into the UN negation-yielding earth, but, so far, only one well has produced any oil worth considering, and that has since been closed down. The main part of the search is taking place in Western Aus negation Tralia, the largest, but most sparsely populated, of the 6 states. When the one successful well was sunk, Australia indulged in a mild oil boom. Mushroom companies sprang up in all directions and their shares were snatched up by frenzied speculators, who seldom inquired into the credentials of the promoters or their right to prospect in any particular area. When I was last in Canada, a phenomenal oil boom had been followed by the inevitable slump, and thousands of speculators had been ruined like their counterparts in Australia. Geologists the world over will maintain that the only way to ascertain whether there is oil in a certain spot is to put down a trial bore. They are wrong. There is another way. A trained diviner can foretell the presence or absence of oil with a very high degree of accuracy, without putting down a bore to prove it. The truth is that, instead of being possessed of uncanny supernatural powers, a diviner is merely a kind of human radio set, able to tune into certain waves or vibrations. Few diviners realize that they do not find the actual water or oil, but only the emanation given off by the substance for which they are looking. They tune themselves into this emanation, without realizing what they are doing or how they are doing it. Certain reactions on the physical body, the persona or mask, which they always get when dealing with each individual earth deposit, assure them that they have found what they are negationing. Divining is a gift, just as music is a gift. How do composers hear the great orchestral scores which they write, perhaps for 100 instruments? Other people do not hear them, although they may be quite close to the composer when he is writing his music. Everyone accepts this musical gift as a matter of course, yet diviners are so often discredited and mocked. Divining is based on the simplest principle. No water, no reaction, no oil, no reaction, and the same applies to whatever else I may be seeking. Getting a reaction is only the first step, but it is the essential one. The water diviner must then work out his own system for finding the depth and probable yield in gallons and whether the water is fit for human consumption. Every region has its own idiosyncrasies, and the diviner's task is greatly simplified if he is working in a district with which he is familiar. But a diviner working in strange territory has many difficulties to contend with, the two worst being the local diviner and the prejudiced geologist. At the risk of making myself unpopular with my fellow negation diviners, let me say that I have a good deal of sympathy with the geologist in his contacts with the divining fraternity, for if they have to listen to the same sort of nonsense that is inflicted upon me in nearly every part of the world I visit, it isn't so negation prizing that there are so many prejudiced and antagonistic geologists. Some of these diviners are genuine in asking me for an interview to hear what is being done in other countries, but a great many are not. The majority only want to tell me what wonderful things they can do. Sometimes they tell me they are so sensitive that rubber heels insulate them, or that a gold filling in a tooth spoilt their gift and had to be removed before they could work again. But in every case, they would let me know, pretty plainly, how much better they could do my job than I could. Perhaps the worst are those who want me to join them in their wonderful discoveries, such as rivers of oil flowing across the country, which they have followed with their divining rods for at least 20 miles. When I look skeptical, they explain that it is the migration of the oil which they feel, and become extremely annoyed when I mildly remark that oil takes millions of years to migrate and that, to be able to feel the movement, they would have to stand over it for a Correr's negation ponding length of time. Worse still is the prospector who visits one after dark to tell one about a reef which he has discovered, assaying at least 10 ounces of gold to the ton, and who peers up and down the road before departing because he is being watched by other pros negation pectors who will follow him to steal his secret. Who can blame a skilled geologist for declining to work with such people? But he is very much to blame when he classes genuine, well-trained diviners with these humbugs and condemns the lot. The geologist who docks so is exposing his own ignorance and condemning himself, for the big divining societies in England, France, Germany, Italy and Holland include many eminent scientists and geologists among their members, with credentials equal to his own and, in some cases, possibly better. Another thing that strikes one forcibly as one moves about the world is that it is the small, unimportant, geologist, who is most bitter and prejudiced, probably because he fears that, if the diviner can do what he claims to be able to do, his own occupation will disappear. Personally, I have found that a geologist of standing is always courteous and willing to listen. I won't say that he will meet a diviner with open arms, meta-negation forically or otherwise, but he will listen to what he or she has to say and judge for himself whether the advice is of any value, either to himself or his company. Above all, I feel confident in saying that the skilled diviner can look forward to the coming of a new era. ESP is progressing so remarkably that it cannot be long before the gift of divining is universally recognized and used. Unfortunately, many diviners are their own worst enemies. They seem to think that because they can find one mineral, they can find all, or that they can find oil because they can find water. This is about as absurd as a pianist thinking that he can play the violin because he can play the piano. The musical knowledge gained when learning the piano will be of use to him in learning the violin, but the actual technique is so entirely different that each instrument must be learnt separately. So is it with divining. Every mineral and earth deposit must be an individual study, and, until this is realized and put into practice, diviners will keep landing themselves into all sorts of trouble. And here lies a great difficulty which the aspiring diviner has to face: how to learn and find the opportunity of practice negation ing. I can warn all beginners that the most difficult branch to get into is oil. Whenever a diviner tries to get into oil, whether on maps or on the field, the question which he is invariably asked is, "What proof have you got that you can find oil?" The answer, in nearly every case, is, none. In this I was more fortunate than most diviners, for as men negationed earlier I had proved at Signal Hill in California that I could find oil. Still, this is not the same as getting a well drilled on one's personal finding, and to do that, it is necessary to find someone with the money and courage to put down a test bore. Since the cost might run into £100,000 or more, according to the depth and nature of the ground, it is rarely that any person or company can be found to do it. The diviner is told, "We cannot employ you without actual proof." In my own case, this vicious circle lasted for years. Then, in the dramatic way in which most things seem to happen to me, a hand was stretched out across the sea. It was that of the famous American author Kenneth Roberts, who wrote Northwest Passage and many other well-known books, who had been taking an interest in my personal work and in divining generally. He had discovered a diviner in America, named Henry Gross, whose work was outstanding, and wrote a book about him. In it he included a description of some work I had done for him on maps of Bermuda, where he spent much time during the cold of the American winter. On the strength of this book, I received a letter from an American oil magnate which shattered my vicious circle. He sent me a drawing of an area in which he was interested, with the information that he had put down a trial bore on this land and got one good oil well, but, although he and neighboring companies had put down 8 more bores around it, they had all proved to be dry. Could I tell him why? All he sent was a large sheet of paper marked in squares drawn to scale, showing the exact position of each well in relation to the others. There was absolutely nothing else. No creeks, townships or surface waters were shown, and there was nothing to indicate that it was a map of any particular place. At first, I was flabbergasted. Until then I had confidence in the fact that I could find minerals in the earth hundreds, and even thousands of feet below the surface, and outline the perimeter of the deposits, as well as indicate the main faults on maps of places I had never seen and which were, perhaps, 10,000 miles away. But, in this case, considerably more was wanted. As I knew that my correspondent owned many oil fields, it was certain that he would employ only highly skilled geologists, engineers, and experienced drillers. The drillers always have a considerable say in putting down trial bores, known in America as wildcats. He would also have the most up-to-date machines for finding oil. This made it all the more strange that, just through reading a non-scientific book, admittedly from the pen of a wizard but still just a book for popular reading, he should have enough confidence in me to ask me to solve his problem for him. Curiously enough, once I had got over the first shock and started to work, the position began to unfold under my hand and became quite clear. After some very careful work, I found a big fault which ran at an angle across country from south to north and which, greatly to my surprise, included the yield negation ing well. This fault gave the reaction for oil. I was getting out of my depth, as this was beyond anything I had attempted before, but I decided to outline the oil with my pendulum and, for the time being, ignore the fault. Then I had another surprise. There were bulges or pockets of oil at intervals, connected by a narrow ribbon of oil, like beads on a piece of string, but at a considerable distance from each other. The fault was oil-bearing. The good well was in the largest bulge, but the other 8 had missed the fault altogether. Although my work seemed to me to be all right, I guessed what a critical army of experts it would have to face. Anyway, it passed the test and my correspondent's problem was pre-negation assumably solved, for he sent me more and more maps to do. Yet it was many years before any actual boring was done on the locations I had marked. Then, when I was in England in 1954, I got a letter from him saying that a test had been made by putting down 10 bores and the result was 9 yielding oil wells. I was, naturally, very thrilled, but was anxious to know why the 10th well was dry if the other 9 were successful. So I asked that the perimeter of the oil reservoir which, as always, I had drawn with meticulous negation loose care, should be remeasured to make sure that the dry well was within it. That was done and, to my great relief, the dry well was found to be just outside it. Although I could not boast of a full 100% success, the result gave me confidence that the perimeters of the other oil reservoirs which I had delineated were correct also. Following this first success, a neighboring oil company put down 3 bores on spots taken from my map and found 3 yielding wells, while my correspondent, the oil magnate, put down another 9, all of which were successful. Which goes to prove that it is possible to test a ground for oil, without having to go to the expense of sinking a bore. These 21 good wells in the United States were all discovered by me, through reading maps in Australia, thousands of miles away from the actual oil. I have never even seen the oil magnate for whom I worked and who proved to be one of the most considerate and generous of employers and a man with a delightful sense of humor. Although my map reading was successful in the cases I have just described, it is, if possible, highly advisable for the diviner to check his map findings on the actual ground. When dealing with oil, the great difficulty is the faults. On the map they give so little radiation that they are extremely difficult to find and, when very small, they may escape detection by the most skilled and careful diviner. But on the ground itself they are easy to detect, for once a diviner steps onto a fault, the attraction from the oil is immediately cut off, some negation times with such force that the diviner is thrown off his feet. Recently, in Barbados in the West Indies, I visited an area where an American company was sinking a test bore for oil. While my friends were talking to the superintendent, I did a little quiet work on my own and found that the bore was neatly placed in the very middle of a small fault. The company went down over 15,000 feet and, of course, found no oil, although there was a small quantity on either side of the fault. By employing a trained diviner, they could have avoided all that waste of money and labor. Even a novice could have found that fault for them on the ground. One of the objects of the divining societies is to bring about. Geologists does magnificent work all over the world and suffers much hardship in the course of it, but he can only go so far. He can find indications of the right strata for oil and the correct geological structure, but can still only say, oil should be found here, and not oil will be found here. The trained diviner can say positively whether oil can be found in any particular place, depending entirely upon his reactions. When I was discussing this with an official in an oil company recently, he asked me how anyone could set about getting a trained diviner to do this work. The best answer, I believe, is to get one through the British Society of Dowsers and train him yourself. He should be able to work on maps, since in dealing with oil and the vast areas of the world in which it is found, this gift is invaluable. Then turn him loose on an oil field and give him all the information that he wants. Help him in every way, always remembering that he is a student and must learn his subject like every other beginner. He will have to work out a code for himself, probably with his subconscious mind, for nobody can do that for him. This makes it almost impossible to teach divining, beyond outlining what has to be done. Thus, in order to be of any value to a company or government, the student must do his own work, and the more advanced student can do little to help. This does not signify that the less advanced student cannot outstrip the more advanced one, therefore no keen worker who has the divining gift need be discouraged, no matter how inexperienced he may be. Having gone so far, he must then work out another system enabling him to form an idea whether an oil well, or even a whole field, is going to be worth developing or not. In this, as before, he will have to develop his own individual system. Given a diviner who is keen on his job and whose heart is in his work and not only in his paycheck, he should become one of the most valuable members of the staff of any oil company. I suggest, however, to any company employing him that he should only be allowed to work for a short period of time each day, whether on maps or on the ground, and, even then, not every day without a break. He can do a great deal in a short time, because the work is so concentrated and intense while it lasts. To do more than this, means that the human body will not stand up to the work, and the diviner, who has been so carefully trained, will not only be a dead loss to the company but probably a dead man as well. I speak from personal experience. When I worked for the government of British Columbia as their official water and oil diviner, they worked me, and I worked myself, so hard that I went back to Victoria to receive a death sentence from the best doctors there. They told my old friends, the general and his wife, there was nothing they could do for me and promised I would be dead within 6 weeks. However, my ability to sleep, which I did for nearly 48 hours on end, and the ministrations of a remarkable man, a chiropractor, who was a genius at his work, saved my life. But it was over a year before I could do more than walk across a room, and considerably more before I could go for a walk alone, all of which could have been avoided with reasonable care. Finally, I would like to add a word of warning to the map diviner: don't set out with the belief that map divining is easy and can be learnt in a few weeks or even months. It cannot. It takes many years of hard work and bitter disappointments to become efficient. Most of the time it is rather dull and exacting work, interspersed with days when one makes some unexpected and thrilling discovery, and everything seems so easy. End of part 25.